Record. Okay, so this is ki tisa. Literally, ki tisa means when you will raise, when you will lift up, but it refers in biblical Hebrew to count people is to raise the census, to raise the number. And why that is, we can talk about that, but that's just the Hebrew language, biblical Hebrew. So here we go. The people of Israel are told to each contribute exactly a half a shekel of silver to the sanctuary. Instructions are also given regarding the making of the sanctuary's water basin, anointing oil and incense. Wise-hearted artisans, Bitzalel and Elihav, are placed in charge of the sanctuary's construction, and the people are once again commanded to keep the Shabbat. So this is sort of the introductory passage, almost like a continuation of the last 2 weeks, which was about the building of the Mishkan, building of the tabernacle. So now we have sort of the portions that conclude that, and now the drama begins. But before we even get to the drama, I just want to point out that here it says that every person was supposed to give exactly a half a coin. And we'll read the verses later. It says the wealthy cannot give more and the poor cannot give less. Everybody must give a half a coin. But it's important to realize that that is not the only opportunity to contribute. When you talk about contributing to the building, to the construction of a tabernacle, the Torah says earlier that everybody would give based on their heart's desire. In other words, how much their heart motivated them. In other words, every person gave whatever they want. If you wanted to give more, you can give more. If you wanted to give less, you can give less, because it was an expression of your own feeling and emotion and an emotional bond with God. So there's no limits, how much or how little. So that was for most of the temple. But then there was one type of contribution that was here to highlight that everybody gives only half the coin, no more, no less. Everybody is equal. And that was used for a specific purpose. Maybe we'll discuss it, but it's important to realize that the exact amount was only one way of expressing our connection to God. The other one was everybody gives what they want. Okay, fine. Now there comes the drama. When Moses does not return, when expected from Mount Sinai, the people make a golden calf and worship it. God proposes to destroy the errant nation, but Moses intercedes on their behalf. Moses descends from the mountain carrying the tablets of the testimony engraved with the 10 Commandments. So Moshe has, just to highlight here, the Jewish people heard the 10 Commandments from God at the giving of the Torah 41 days earlier, but they did not necessarily didn't receive the hard copy, right? God spoke to them the words of the 10 Commandments, but he didn't give them the record, the written record, the tablets of stone where the 10 Commandments were engraved. So Moshe, 40 days, Moshe was on the mountain for 40 days, and then he's going to descend with the tablets. So Moshe descends with the tablets, and he's seeing the people dancing about their idol. He breaks the tablets, destroys the golden calf, and has the primary culprits put to death. No point of giving them the tablets if they already violated the first 2 of the 10 Commandments. He then returns to God to say, if you do not forgive them, blot me out from the book that you have written. Because God, a lot of drama here. God says, you know what, I'll kill the people and I'll make you, Moses, a new nation. And Moses tells God, if you're not going to forgive them, then I don't want to have anything to do with your project here called the Jewish people. So blot me out of the book if you didn't destroy the people. God forgives, but says that the effect of their sin will be felt for many generations. At first, God proposes to send his angel along with them, but Moses insists that God himself accompany his people to the promised land. Moses prepares a new set of tablets and once more ascends the mountain where God rescinds the covenant. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm reading this. Where God reinscribes, not rescinds, God forbid, where God reinscribes the covenant on these second tablets. On the mountain, Moses is also granted a vision of the divine 13 attributes of mercy. So there's a lot of mysticism in this Parsha. We see things are happening. It's not exactly clear. If we have time, we'll read it. But in any case, one of the things Moses gets is the 13 attributes of mercy, which is the formula which we evoke. God tells Moshe, you evoke this formula when you want to touch God in a very deep way and you want to cause forgiveness. And indeed, we say this multiple times during the year. Most days we'll say the 13 attributes of mercy, except for Shabbat. On Yom Kippur, we say it multiple times. Ne'ilah, the final prayer of Yom Kippur, where we really want to finalize the forgiveness, we actually say the 13 attributes multiple times. I don't know how many, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 or more. So that's the secret formula that we get. So radiant is Moses' face upon his return that he must cover it with a veil, which he removes only to speak with God and to teach his laws to the people. Now, you may have seen or may have heard that Moses had horns, right? That's the famous picture of Michelangelo with Moses has horns. Where did they get the idea that Jews or Moses has horns? So it's interesting to note that the verse says, Karan or Panei Moshe. The skin of Moshe's face becomes Karan. What does Karan mean? Well, it means radiate, but it so happens to be that the word can also mean horn, not in this context, but it could also mean horn. So I guess some people say, well, maybe this is where they realized they thought Moses had horns, but of course Moses didn't have horns. Instead, his face radiated. So that's the story. A lot of drama, a lot to talk about, a lot of deep mystical concepts within this parsha, a lot of deep spiritual messages in this parsha. The only question is where to begin from. So we can begin. We can begin with the philosophy, or we can with the drama. We can begin all different places. So if anybody has anything specific they want to talk about, please mention it. Otherwise, we'll do what we always do: is start with the beginning, because that's just the easiest. So we'll start at the beginning. But where's the beginning? The beginning is not really the beginning. The beginning is the name. I had a friend who said like this. He said that usually, if you're asked to talk about the Parsha, you have to know something that the Parsha says. So if you're a rabbi and it's Sunday, you have to know what Parsha is coming up, because you never know. Somebody may ask you to say something on the Parsha. So you have to be aware of what the Parsha talks about. I take that back, even if you're not a rabbi. Any Jew, someone sees you, they're going to say, "Nu, tell me something from the Torah." So you have to have something. You have to know what the Parsha says to be able to say. So my friend said like this. He said, what the Rebbe did for us, he did us a service. You don't even have to know what the Parsha says. All you have to know is the name of the Parsha, because the Rebbe taught that the name of the Parsha itself is a lesson. So you get it out. You don't even have to know what the Parsha talks about. You just know the name. You can already talk about it and say what the lesson, because the name of the Parsha is also significant. What's the name of the Parsha? The name of the Parsha is Ki Tisa, when you will raise. So we'll talk about that later, why a census is raising. When you count people in biblical Hebrew, it's picking up their heads. But the bottom line is, we're going to talk about the name, Ki Tisa, when you will raise up the Jewish people. Now, the problem is, and the Rebbe asked this question, actually, the last time the Rebbe spoke about this Parsha, 1992, 30 years ago, right before, the week before he had a stroke. It's actually not the last thing he said, but it's the last talk essay he edited. And that essay asks this question, 30 years ago this week, asks this question. If you had to characterize this Parsha, how would you refer to this Parsha? This Parsha is the epic failure and descent and betrayal and any other adjective that you can use to describe how low the people fell. They stood at Sinai, they were righteous. The Talmud says, the Medrash says actually, that when they stood at Sinai, they went back to the state of Adam and Eve before the sin. They were pure. They had the revelation of the Ten Commandments. They experienced the divine presence. They were what we would call righteous people, completely righteous. And very quickly, in this week's Parsha, they fall very low to the extent that they're violating the first two tablets, the first two commandments. Now, somebody violates the first two commandments. You say, well, maybe they weren't sure if God spoke it. These people experienced the revelation. They heard it directly from God. And it's not like they had to wait many years. A few minutes later, they fall. A few days later, they fall. And they fall in a terrible way. And a lot of this Parsha is the sin and its consequence. And yet the Rebbe asked in this essay 30 years ago, the Rebbe asked, how could all of this, all this terrible descent, be in the Parsha whose name And the name, it's the name of the entire Parsha. So the name has to express the theme of the entire Parsha. The name of the entire Parsha is uplifting, is to raise up. It's not a story about going up, it's a story about going down. That's a very big question. It's not a question if you think, well, the name is just arbitrary. They just happened to choose the first two words of the Parsha and they named the Parsha. But no, from the Hasidic perspective, the name of the Parsha has to express the theme of the entire Parsha. So if the entire Parsha is about descent and sin and betrayal and its aftermath, how is it that the entire Parsha is called Ki Tisa, when you will go up, when you will raise the Jewish people? And the answer, of course, is, if you've been here a little bit and you studied a little bit of Hasidic philosophy, you can guess the answer. The answer is, and this was the big idea that the Rebbe spoke of that week, the big idea is the greatest ascent, the greatest elevation, surprisingly, counterintuitively, the greatest elevation happens because of the failure, after the failure. So when you look at this Parsha, this is not a Parsha of failure. Yeah, there is failure in this Parsha, but that's not the point of the Parsha. The Parsha is not about the failure and betrayal. The Parsha is about the fact that the Jewish people could grow to a higher level even than being righteous. How do they grow? Because if they can recuperate from the failure, if they can do teshuvah, if they can repent as they do, then they're actually on a higher level than they were before they sinned. So now you're putting on a Hasidic lens to this entire Parsha. This entire Parsha is not, even the failure is not seen as descent. It's like the Hasidim say, it's a descent for the purpose of ascent. You're going back, so you should be able to go forward, right? The metaphor is, if you want to jump over a table. So, well, not me, I can't jump over a table, but theoretically, someone who knows how to jump over a table. So if you're standing very close to the table, you can't jump over. You have to go back, take a few steps back, and then you can run forward and leap over. But you have to go back before you can leap forward to overcome the obstacle. So the point here is you have to be able to go back in order to go forward. So the going back, you're not going away from your goal. In fact, the stepping back is actually part and parcel of your moving forward. So the descent is actually a stage in the ascent. And basically what we want to look for as we read the Parsha, we want to look for, especially the second half of the Parsha, we want to look for clues where the second tablets, even though on the surface, the second tablets were not as great as the first tablets, as we will show. And at the surface, the state of the Jewish people at the second half of the Parsha is not as great as at Sinai. There are certain things that show that there was a descent here. We can point them out as we go along. But we're going to read the Parsha with the Hasidic lens and say every aspect of this Parsha is Ki Tisa, is raising up. The descent is part of the raising. If you have not failed, you cannot reach your full potential. And this is radical because it's not just that teshuvah is a response to a negative situation, but it's that God, I hate to say this, but God almost directs us to a place where we have the opportunity to sin and where we have the motivation to sin, even though we have free choice. But God orchestrates that we have opportunity and motivation to sin because we're going to be able to grow and elevate ourselves and elevate the world to a higher level when we sin and we overcome it than if we had not sinned. And this is a radical idea. And there's a lot more to say about what exactly the elevation is. We'll talk about that as we go along, hopefully. But now we'll get into now that we got by the name. Now we got by the name. Now we can start reading the Parsha. Okay. So what we want to do here is the first thing we want to understand is as follows. The order of the Parsha of the last 5 portions of the book of Exodus is not in the chronological order. So the way it's set up in the Torah is you have 2 portions about the Mishkan, about the tabernacle, God commanding Moshe how to make the tabernacle, how to make the furniture, and how to make the garments for Aaron. That's 2 portions. Then you have the portion of the golden calf. And then you have another 2 portions, how the Jewish people actually fulfilled the commandment and build the tabernacle. So the story of the golden calf is really put in between, sandwiched between 4 portions of the tabernacle, 2 before and 2 after. Now, the sages look at this and they say, we're not exactly sure when the golden calf happened, but we know for sure it didn't happen exactly where it happened. In other words, what God is doing, what the Torah is doing, it wants to bury the story, the negative story of the golden calf, in between stories that highlight the positive, which is God's connection to the Jewish people and how God wants to dwell amongst the Jewish people. And therefore, God asks the Jewish people to dwell in their midst and to build a home for him. So everything about the Mishkan represents God's love for the people. So what we do is we hide the story of the golden calf in between there. If you read books on writing, they say like this. They say it's the big debate between the writers. What's the most powerful part of the sentence? And what's the most powerful part of the paragraph? The same thing as with the chapter, but paragraph and sentence, they for sure say this. So there's a machlaikas, there's a disagreement. I thought there's only disagreements in the Talmud. No. Some people say the greatest punch is the beginning of the sentence. Most people say it's the end. But all agree that the information that you have to bury, that you have to just put out to the reader, which is not what you're trying to emphasize, but you have to put it in there, you throw that into the middle of the sentence. You throw that into the middle of the paragraph. That's where you bury all the boring information, because if you want to make an impact, you have two opportunities to make an impact, in the beginning and at the end. Maybe the end more than the beginning, but the bottom line is not the middle. That's not what's going to make the impact. So that's what it reminds me. That's what the Torah is doing. The Torah is placing the information it's trying to hide in between these stories. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because now when we read these stories that precede the golden calf, we have to look at it and say, it's very likely that it happened after the golden calf. So now we're going to read these stories. We'll do at least one, the first commandment to the Parsha, and we talk about atonement, and we talk about half the shekel, and we talk about all of this. You have to realize that some of this is a response to the golden calf, and it's not really preceding the golden calf. So that's what we're going to do. I really can do this to all the portions that happen before the story and show their connection, but we're not going to do it to all. We'll do it to one. And then we'll go to the story, to the drama, because the drama is too exciting to miss. Okay. I just want to point out that this Parsha is a very interesting Parsha, just the technical part. The first reading is very, very long. The second reading is relatively long, and all the other readings are short. What happens? What happens is like this. We know that on Shabbat, we divide the reading into 7, and we call up 7 people, and an 8th for Maftir. We don't want to call an Israelite, we don't want to call up a Jew to get the reading and call him up, and he should get the blessing and get the portion of the golden calf. Why would you do that to somebody? You're going to call up somebody and say, okay, we're going to honor you today at the Torah. You know what you're going to read? We're going to read, you know what you're going to say the blessing on? You're going to get the portion of the golden calf. What do you want? You're going to ruin the guy's Shabbos, right? He's going to come home and his wife's going to say, how was shul? He's going to say, it was wonderful. They called me up and they read the story of the golden calf. You know, she's going to say, okay, what did you do wrong this week? So what they do is the second, they put the entire story of the golden calf in the second reading. What's the second reading? The second reading is the portion of the Levite. And the Levites did not sin with the golden calf. So when the Levite gets called up, he's not really telling a story about what happened to his ancestors, because his ancestors were not involved in the crime. So to get the entire story of the golden calf in the second reading, we have a very long first reading. So that's just interesting to see why it's so long. But again, we're not going to read all the stories, even though all those laws that we read in a nutshell before the story of the golden calf are related. But I don't want to go there. I'm going to spend 3, 4, 5 minutes maybe on this half shekel story, and then we'll go straight to the drama. Okay. So let's see if we can find the actual Torah reading. Current Parsha. Whoops. Okay. Exodus chapter 30. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, verse 11, Exodus chapter 30, verse 11 is the opening verse of the Parsha. When you take the sum of the children of Israel, meaning when you count them, but in Hebrew, ki tisa et rosh b'nei Yisrael, when you will lift up the heads of the Jewish people, according to their numbers, let each one give to the Lord an atonement for his soul when they are counted. Then there will be no plague among them when they are counted. In other words, you want to count the Jews, but each person has to give atonement, because if you're going to count the Jews and you don't give atonement, then there may be a plague. So you don't count the Jews, you count the coins. What should you do? They shall give everyone who goes through the counting half a shekel according to the holy shekel. 20 gerahs equal 1 shekel. Half of such a shekel shall be an offering to God. Everyone who goes through the counting from the age of 20 and upward shall give an offering to the Lord. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall give no less than half a shekel, with which to give the offering to the Lord to atone for your souls. You shall take the silver of the atonements from the children of Israel and use it for the work of the tent of meeting. It shall be a remembrance for the children of Israel before the Lord to atone for your souls. Okay, so here the Torah is telling us that each person gave a half a shekel, and they took the half shekel coins and they used it for the temple. What did they use it for? Maybe we'll talk about that next week. But it happens to be that the sages say that this is also a mitzvah, and going forward, even after they built a temple, every year, every person would give a half a coin, and they would take all that money and use it for the offerings of the temple, for the sacrifices in the temple, for the communal offerings. So today, if you want to fulfill the ritual, fulfill the commandments, to fulfill the ritual that is of prayer, which was established to commemorate for the offerings, which we don't have, which we'll read about in the third book of the Torah. So you have to pray 3 times a day, or you have to go to shul if you want to fulfill the minyan. But the bottom line is, when in biblical times, all you have to do is go to shul 3 times a year. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the 3 pilgrimage holidays. And you also didn't have to pray 3 times a day. I mean, at least not in the formal prayer. All you did is pay a half a coin. It's a pretty good deal. Half a coin, and that is your religious obligation for the year. The point here is that that's what the machzit hashekel becomes. Here it's for the temple, but later it was used also for the yearly annual contribution for the offerings in the temple. Okay, fine. What is interesting about this? The interesting about this half coin, and everybody likes to talk about it, is the fact that it's half. Because in Judaism, usually we say, whatever you're going to give to God, it should be complete, right? Give something complete. Why give a half? Half represents you're not giving it wholeheartedly. So everybody wants to know, what is the meaning of the half? And there are all kinds of interpretations. But the interpretation, most interpretations say, look, the atonement comes when you realize that you're half, when you realize that you're part of something greater than yourself. Now, if you look at the verse, it's very interesting. You look at the verse doesn't say, the verse emphasizes that it's a half. Because look what the verse says, verse 13. This they shall give, everyone who goes through the counting, half a shekel, according to the holy shekel. 20 gerahs equal 1 shekel. Half of such a shekel shall be an offering to the Lord. That's 3 lines to tell me how much coin, how much silver to give. Well, the whole coin weighs 20 gerah. You give half of that. Okay, I could just say, why don't each person give 10 gerah of silver? And that's clear, everyone will know how much to give. No, there's 20 gerah is a full shekel. And we're going to give a half a shekel. You see how the Torah is going out of its way to highlight that you're only giving half. So what's the significance of half? And also, what's the significance of half in the context of what's really happening here, of the atonement for the sin of the golden calf? Because like I said, even though this story is written before, but it's really a response to the golden calf, because the golden calf was written out of order. Okay, so let's talk about half for a moment. And we're going to jump ahead. And after the sin of the golden calf, God tells Moshe, I'm making a covenant. I'm going to make a covenant with your people. And there's a second covenant. Why? Because whatever happened at Sinai failed. God came to the Jewish people, gave them a list of 10 rules. They violated the first 2 primary rules. That didn't work. To try that again is foolish. It didn't work the first time. It's not going to work the second time. So here God says, you know what? We're going to make a covenant. Now, what is a covenant from the perspective of Judaism? What is a covenant from the perspective of the Torah, as the Torah describes a covenant? So today, you think of a covenant as a contract. But really, a covenant is much deeper than a contract, because a contract, the whole idea of a contract is that it's conditional. The contract has 2 parts. It has what I'm going to give and what I'm going to get, and what I'm going to get is conditioned on what I'm going to give. But a covenant is different. A covenant is a sign of an unconditional bond. That's what a covenant is in the Torah. And therefore, after the sin of the golden calf, God says, you know, we're going to make a covenant with the people that is a unconditional bond. Even if the people sin, the covenant will still be there. There may be punishment, but the covenant will still be there. Unlike before the covenant, when the Jewish people sinned, God says, you know what, I'm going to destroy the people, because that was before the covenant. But once there's a covenant, it's unconditional, so God won't destroy the people. Okay. How do they make a covenant? So we read about this earlier when we read about in the book of Genesis, but how do they make a covenant? So in Hebrew, to make a covenant, the Hebrew word is koreit brit. Brit is a covenant, like the brit milah, the circumcision is brit is a covenant. But koreit brit, lichrot brit, literally the verb of making a covenant, literally means to cut. To cut a covenant. Why are you cutting a covenant? What does it mean to cut a covenant? So Rashi explains, and other commentaries explain, that in those days, and you'll see it in Genesis where it's written explicitly, the way they made a covenant is they would cut something in half, usually an animal, and the two people who are making the covenant would pass through both halves of the animal. And that's why you say the act of making the covenant is called kritat brit, the cutting of the covenant, because they would actually cut something in half, and both parties walk through both halves, and that represents that we're whole, and that's the covenant. So that's the way it is. If you don't believe me, look in the book of Genesis. And if you don't believe me, look at Rashi's commentary in the book of Deuteronomy, where he keeps saying this is how the people made covenants in those days. And when the Torah says covenant, that's what the Torah means, which is why the Torah uses the term koreit, cut the covenant, as the act of the verb of creating the covenant. Now, that's a very strange thing to do, because what is a covenant? Covenant is a bond. So the word should be tying. You're creating a bond. I would think that what they should do is tie two things together, not slice something in half. Right? So if you ask me, if the people in the Middle East would ask me how to make a covenant, I say, I have a better idea. Why take something whole and cut it in half and have both parties walk through the two halves? You take a rope, tie everybody together, and that's it. Or do something that represents cleaving or connection. Why the cutting in half? And here comes a very profound, deep Hasidic idea and tells us about what a covenant is and why giving half the coin brings to atonement, which is all tied in, because we have this theme in the beginning of the Parsha where each person gives half, and we have it in the end of the Parsha where God says, I'm going to cut a covenant with you, which is symbolized by cutting something in half and both people walking through. What's the deal with the half? It should be about connection, not about separation, not about cutting. So when I bind two things together, I take two things and I tie a rope around them. It's very nice. They're both very close to each other, but they're two entities that are close to each other. No matter how close they come, they're still two separate entities. And because they're two separate entities, the bond can sever over time. When you take something complete and you cut it in half and you have both parties walk through both parts, that's much more profound. What we're saying is we're only half. Who's the other half? God is the other half. Now, no matter what you do, you could run away from your other half. You could ignore your other half. Doesn't matter. You have a bond with God because you're 10 and he's 10 and together you're 20, right? We have, our soul has 10 spherot. God has 10 ways of expressing himself. They mirror each other. We're only half. We're not a complete identity. So wherever we may be, we can't get away from God because he's the other half. We are one entity. We're one essence that was separated at some point, but it's one, or we have the same DNA. It's one essence. It's one core. And that's what the atonement comes from. The atonement comes from realizing not that we want to come close to God, not that we're going to fulfill God's commandments. Those are all wonderful things. It's very nice to be next to your other half. It's a wonderful thing. It's very nice to do nice things for your other half. It's a wonderful thing. But that's not the core of the bond. Because if the core of the bond is that I do what you want, then when I don't do what you want, then the bond is gone. So if the bond would be that I tie two things together, then, okay, now they're tied together, but tomorrow they may be untied. But giving the half a shekel, and later on in the Parsha when God says, I'm cutting a covenant, koreit brit, I'm cutting a covenant, we're taking something, cutting it in half, both of us are walking through, this is the symbol that we're both one half, we're two halves of one whole. That represents the fact that the bond is unconditional, that no matter what happens, no matter where we go, we're intrinsically connected because we're one. We're one entity. And that is the truth that is revealed at the second tablets, where we get the second tablets and God makes the covenant. So that's just a little bit of understanding of what the idea, how does atonement come from? By the way, what is atonement? Atonement doesn't mean God will forgive the sin and forgive the punishment. Atonement means we get to the point where God recognizes and we're recognized that we're one with God, and therefore the sin is superficial and external and not who we are, and therefore it falls away, right? When I sin, when I betray, I think I am the betrayal. That's part of the betrayal. I think this is who I am. I think I'm harming. I get into a fight with my grandmother. I get into a fight with my mother. So what does that mean? It means I think I'm separated from them, right? Or they're separated from me. They harm me. That's external. When you get to the core level, atonement means when we recognize we're one. And if we get to the point where that true bond is revealed, then the external layers fall away, and that's what atonement means. Okay, so that's a little bit of explaining the bond and how forgiveness works, and a little bit of explaining the half the shekel, even though there's so much more to say. But I think it's time to go to the drama, because we hadn't had drama in the last 2 weeks, and we're not going to have drama for another very long time. Most of the book of Leviticus is going to be no drama. So we want to read the story and read the excitement, and then we'll see what was their mistake. But more important, what's the mistake for us and what's the lesson for us? And of course, how do we grow from this experience? Because as we mentioned in the beginning, like your Rebbe said, the entire Parsha is really about growth. It's not about betrayal and failure, even though it's that too, but we're redefining. Everyone at some point is going to have some degree of failure. And this Parsha teaches us how the failure leads to greater heights. Okay, so let's read the story. Let's go to the second reading. As I said, the first reading is very long because we want to put the entire second reading in the entire story of the golden calf in the second reading, because that's the way the Levite gets called up, and the Levites have not sinned. So here we go. When he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, meaning when God finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of testimony, stone tablets written with the finger of God. It was very beautiful, but of course there's some romance here as well, because the sages say, when he finished. How do you say finished in Hebrew? So there are different ways to say it. One way is kichaloto. We had it in the book of Genesis, vayechulu. Concluding is kichaloto. Now in the Torah, there are no vowels. So kichaloto could be read kikalato, as his bride. A kala is a bride, okay? So Rashi in the commentaries explain that the Torah is like the bride in the sense that it creates that bond between God and the Jewish people. So we have the imagery of Mount Sinai being the wedding and the Torah being the bride, and that's kichaloto, like his bride. But in any case, the simple meaning is when he concluded, when God finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, they had a very long class, 40 days. You're lucky the class here is going to end at 11 o'clock, God willing. Moses had a 40-day class. When the class was over, he got a written record. He got the 10 tablets written on stone. Chapter 32, when the people saw that Moses was late in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, come on, make us gods that will go before us, because this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what had become of him. Aaron said to them, remove the golden earrings that are on your ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring those earrings to me. Now let's say something for Aaron. Aaron, according to the sages, what he's trying to do, he's trying to slow down the process. If the Jewish people build the golden calf, they would have done it in 10 minutes. What Aaron does, he says, Aaron is an old man at the time, he's 86 years old. He says, I'll build it. What does he want to do? He wants to slow the process down. As you will see, he manages to postpone the sin the entire day until the next morning. And Aaron keeps hoping that Moses is going to descend from the mountain and put an end to this madness. The problem with Aaron's plan is that the next day, as you will see, the verse says the people woke up early to sin. It's not like they first went to the gym, then they ate breakfast, then they took the kids to school, then they ran some errands, and then they had some extra time, so they went and they sinned. No, they were anxious to sin, so they woke up early, and that's why by the time Moshe comes in the morning hours, it's too late. But you see what Aaron's doing. The first thing Aaron does is give me the jewelry of your wives and your children. Now, the children don't want to give the jewelry. My guess is the women don't either want to give the jewelry. In fact, the Medrash says the women did not participate in the sin of the golden calf, and they did not offer their jewelry. But what did the people do? They didn't go to their wives and children. All the people stripped themselves of the golden earrings that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron. They didn't go to their children, didn't go to their wives. They were so anxious, they gave their own jewelry. He took them from their hands, fashioned it with an engraved tool, and made it into a molten calf, upon which they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, they already built an idol. They're going to go serve the idol. What does he do? Aaron says, you can't just serve an idol. Whoever heard of serving an idol? You have to build an altar. But it takes time to build an altar, especially if you're 86 years old, especially if you're doing it alone. So Aaron says, I'm going to build an altar. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it. And Aaron proclaimed and said, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. What does he do? Tomorrow, the party's tomorrow. Took him all afternoon to build. Tomorrow is the party. By the way, he doesn't say for the idol. He says for the Lord. He hopes that tomorrow Moses will come and it will be a festival for the Lord. Problem is, of course, verse 6, on the next day they arose early, offered up burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to drink, and they got up to make merry. And the Lord said to Moses, go descend, for your people that you have brought up from the land of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned away from the path that I have commanded them. They have made themselves a molten calf, and they have prostrated themselves before it, slaughtered sacrifices to it, and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. Now Moshe is, and God tells Moshe, and the Lord says to Moshe, I have seen this people, and behold, they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, and my anger will be kindled against them, so that I will annihilate them, and I will make you into a great nation. Now Moshe, a very good defense attorney, goes on the offensive. A few verses, he discusses with God. God forgives. That's verse 11, 12, 13, which is, by the way, the reading that we read on the public fast day, because on the public fast day, we want God to forgive. So what do? What part of the portion, what part of the Torah do we read? We read the part of the Torah where Moshe causes God to forgive the people. But in any case, let's go back for a second and let's talk about this. What happens? How is it that the people sin so soon after the golden calf and they want to serve idols? So the rabbis in general are good defense attorneys, and if they want to defend you, they'll find ways to defend you, like they did for Aaron. Aaron did this terrible thing. He made a golden calf. The rabbis mitigate his sin and say, no, it's actually a beautiful thing. What he did, he tried to intervene and slow them down. There's also a medrash which says that Aaron saw that the Jewish people would not take no for an answer. If you look at verse Bayar Aharon, I think this is it. No. Let's see the Rashi. I think Rashi quotes it. Let's see what happens here. Okay, there's a medrash that says like this, that says that the Jewish people okay, Rashi doesn't quote it, but in any case, there's a medrash that says that the Jewish people, if you look at the end of last Parsha, a few portions ago, when Moshe ascended to the mountain, Moshe tells the people that I'm going up the mountain. Here, I'm leaving with you Aharon and Hur. Who is Hur? Hur is Moshe and Aaron's nephew, the son of Miriam. And he says, anyone who has any issues, go to them. Beautiful. You have two people to lead. Problem is that we never hear of Hur again. Now that people had a problem, they went to Aaron. And we never hear of Hur again. Where did Hur disappear to? So the sages say what happens was Hur tried to protest the construction of the golden calf, and the people killed Hur. So Aaron sees what happened. He says, okay, I have to go along with them. But again, what he tries to do is to slow them down. And that's Rashi explains beautifully. Let's see, Rashi. Let's see Rashi here. He said, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. Aaron says, but it will not be today. Aaron's thinking to himself, perhaps Moses would come before they would worship it. This is its simple meaning. Its midrashic meaning in Leviticus Rabbah is as follows. Aaron saw many things. Oh, this is the Rashi. He saw his sister's son Hur, who had reproved them, the Israelites, and they assassinated him. That is the meaning of vayiven, an expression of bina, understanding. Mizbeach lefanav should be understood as it was written, vayiven mizavuach lefanav, meaning he understood from the slaughtered one in front of him. This is absolutely very interesting, the way the Hebrew plays out. The Hebrew word is vayiven mizbeach laHashem. He built an altar to God. But an altar comes from the root word of altar is slaughtered, where they would slaughter animals. So vayiven, he built, is the same word from bina, understanding. We had that in the JLI on yesterday and Tuesday, and whatever it was, Tuesday. So here Aaron understood from the one who was slaughtered before him. Basically, Aaron says, okay, I got to go along with this. Moreover, he saw the situation and said, better I should be blamed and not they. So we're having so many reasons why Aaron goes along with it. Number one, he wants to delay it for tomorrow. Number two, he has no choice because they killed Hur and he doesn't want to be killed. Number three, he says, better I do it, so the blame should be placed on Aaron, not on the Jewish people. So he's sort of covering for their acts and of his great love to the people. And number four, also he saw another thing and said, if they build the altar themselves, one will bring pebbles and another one will bring a stone. Thus their work will be done at once. Since I will build it and I will neglect my work, in the meantime, Moses will arrive. This is how you defend somebody, by the way. If you ever saw a legal brief, you give 4 reasons why the person is not guilty. Not all 4 could coexist, but it doesn't matter. You give all 4 and hopefully one will stick. So they see what the rabbis are doing here. So they're defending Aaron. But they do the same thing to the Jews. The rabbis want to defend the Jews. And the rabbis say, how do you do this? How is it possible that the Jewish people serve the idol? So there are various interpretations. The interesting one is from Nachmanides. And Nachmanides says that, look, the Jewish people never really intended to serve an idol. What? The verse says they did. No, they didn't. What they really wanted to do is create a substitute, not for God, but for Moshe. Because otherwise, this story doesn't make sense, right? Moshe is gone. So if Moshe is gone, let us make another God. What? Moshe is not God. If Moshe is gone, make a Moshe. Okay, Moshe is gone, we want a God. Doesn't make sense. Now, let's assume they wanted a God. So Moshe comes down from the mountain. Moshe is back. But we think the idol is God. So why would we let Moshe destroy our God? It just doesn't make sense. Doesn't begin, doesn't end. So that's why Nachmanides says they never wanted to make a God. They wanted to replace Moshe. And therefore, when Moshe comes back, we no more need for the God, no more need for the God, no more need for the idol, because the idol was here to replace Moshe, but now we have Moshe. That's the thesis of Nachmanides. Let's see how this works. Let's see where it fits and where it doesn't. And where it doesn't, we'll have to deal with it. Okay, let's read the story. Vayara'am, when the people saw that Moses was late in coming down to the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, come on, make us gods that will go before us. By the way, this is a problem, the word gods. We're going to have to address this word, gods, because this verse says the people wanted God. Nachmanides says they didn't want a God, they just wanted a place to replace Moshe. So that's a word we have to deal with. But everything else in this verse supports Nachmanides. How so? They say, come make us gods that will go before us, because this man, Moses, he brought us up from the land of Egypt. We don't know what has become of him. You want a God because Moshe is gone? That's not plausible. Moshe is gone, we want a Moshe. Okay. So they really want a Moshe. They really want a leader. So why does the verse say, make us gods? Now, gods, here it's written in the plural, but it's not so simple, because the Hebrew word Elohim, which means God, the word itself is plural. So it doesn't mean gods, it could mean God. So the thing is like this. In biblical Hebrew, in the Bible, the word Elohim, we already had it 2 portions ago. The word for God, the root of that word is El. El is the powerful. And therefore in the Bible, the people who are the Elohim, the word God, the word Elohim refers to God usually, because God is the all-powerful, the almighty. So that's why we call him Elohim. However, in the Bible, not always does Elohim refer to God. Sometimes Elohim refers to other forms of leadership. For example, a few portions ago in Mishpatim, when we read about the civil law, Elohim are the judges. The judges are Elohim, they're the powerful. And many other places in the Bible, the word El or Elohim could refer to the leaders. So Nachmanides says, when it says in this verse, when they said, come, make us gods, because Moshe is gone, they don't want a replacement for God, they want a replacement for Moshe. Okay, so why is the sin so terrible? You see how the rabbis can defend the Jews? Look at that. From serving the idol, violating the first two of the Ten Commandments, they said that's not really what they wanted. Okay, the problem is that once they build it, look what happens. He took them from their hands, fashioned it with an engraved tool. In other words, the gold, right? So verse 3, and all the people stripped themselves of the golden earrings that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took them from their hands, fashioned it with an engraved tool, and made it into a molten calf, upon which they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. What's the problem with this verse? You know, those annoying people, when you speak English and you speak it incorrect, someone stops you and corrects you. You know those ever happen to you? So if I were there and I had to correct these people's Hebrew, I would say, what are you saying? Again, they took them up from their hands, fashioned it with an engraved tool, and made it into a molten calf, upon which they said, listen to the statement, these are your gods, O Israel, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt. What's the problem with the sentence? If it's Jews speaking to Jews, what should they have said? They should have said, these are our gods, O Israel, who have brought us up from the land of Egypt. Why are they speaking? Why are they speaking in the second person? These are your gods, O Israel, which means the speakers are not part of Israel. And that's why some of the commentaries explain, indeed, the Jewish people wanted a golden calf to replace Moshe. But once the golden calf is here, there were other people who incited them to idol worship, incited some of the people to idol worship. And who are those people? So the verse says, when they left Egypt, the verse clearly says, there was a mixed multitude of nations. There were other people, Egyptians and others, who came with them out of Egypt. So here we have other people, of other cultures, inciting the Jewish people for idol worship. Some of the people succumb. Some of the people serve this thing as an idol. Other people serve it as a Moses, and other people are just there for the carnival, to make merry. And that's why when they come down, out of 600,000 people, Moshe kills 3,000 people, or 3,000 sinners out of 600,000. It's a very small percentage of the people serve this as an idol. But most of the people are just there either for the show, or they're there for to serve it as a replacement for Moshe. So that is a little bit of somehow some address this story. Now let's look at one very interesting word that is translated here as the first time we talk about the Egel. So verse 4. Verse 4. He took them from their hands, fashioned it with an engraved tool, and made it into a molten calf. Egel masecha, molten calf. What does molten calf mean? So molten would mean that it was melted. In other words, you take the gold, you put it in the fire, you melt it, and then you can form it. That's what the molten calf means. That's a wonderful, beautiful interpretation, but it's not the only interpretation. There's another interesting interpretation, which is much closer to modern Hebrew. In the Hebrew, egel masecha. Masecha is literally a mask. Usually we read this parsha around Purim time. This year is a leap year, so Purim is a month late. But if it would on a regular year, this week would be Purim. So you talk about masks, you think about Purim. So let's think about mask, the concept of an idol as a mask. What does a mask have anything to do with idol worship? In fact, in the Ten Commandments itself, it says the word masecha. Is it in the Ten Commandments or right after the Ten Commandments? Let me take a quick peek. Okay, it's not in the Ten Commandments, but it's in this week's Parsha as well. It's in this week's Parsha after the sin, toward the end of the Parsha, God says, don't make yourself gods, molten gods, but literally don't make yourself gods of masks. So what does mask have anything to do with a god? So there are all kinds of interpretations. One interpretation is, what's the difference between a mask and a human face? So a human face changes all the time. It's undefined. You're happy today, you're sad tomorrow, you're dynamic, you're moving, and you're changing. So you can't really define what a human face looks like because it's constantly changing. When you take a mask, what is a mask? A mask is you take the image of a person and you freeze it in a certain definition. And the idol worshiper, what is idol worship? Idol worship is you take something and you say, this is an expression, this definition is the expression of God. What's the problem with that? Why is that wrong? Because there is no definition that can express God because God is infinite. So in other words, just like the mask doesn't do justice to the human face because the mask is too defined, whereas the human face is dynamic, always changing. So in that sense, that's really the relationship between the problem with anything that would be a symbol for God, because you're defining what God is, and God cannot be defined because God is infinite. Okay, that's on one level. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper level and think about what is the word masecha, what is a mask? And this is more relevant to us because even though we're not challenged in the sense that we're probably not going to go serve idols tomorrow morning, we're not going to bow down to the stone, but the theme of idol worship or the subtle mistake of idol worship is something we too have to contend with. But to understand how it applies in our life is we have to think about the word for a mask, right? Yeah, so there's different forms of idol worship. One idol worship is the guy says, I'm a self-made man and I worship my creator, right? So that's also a form of idol worship. So what is a mask? What is idol worship? So what's at the core of idol worship? The core of idol worship is the early idol, the pagan cultures believe there's God, but they believe that God, the creator, outsources the control of the universe to various forces of nature. So if you want to be on the good side of the sun, you better worship the sun. Otherwise, the sun is going to burn up your crop or not going to give you enough warmth. Oh, by the way, you also have to hedge because you don't want the god of the storm to be upset at you. So you also have to serve idols. You also have to serve the god of the tsunami. So we shouldn't send a tsunami after you. Oh, but there's all kinds of natural forces. Oh, so you have to diversify and you have to serve everybody because it's like buying insurance. You have to buy insurance against any possible natural disaster. So that's why the idol worshipers never serve one idol. They have a primary idol, but there's never one idol. It's always multiple idols because what's really happening is that they understand, they feel their mistake is that there are forces of nature that have their own independence and have their own decision-making abilities, and therefore you really have to serve them, even though they're probably not the ultimate creator, because they're just a natural force, but the natural force has some power independent of God, and you better be on its good side. That's really the core of idol worship ideology. How do you apply that to cultures where they do not have this idol worship in the physical sense? So the commentaries explain, if I believe that any power, any force of nature has power over me, independent of God, in that sense, I'm worshiping that thing as an idol. Now that could be anything. If I think that any physical phenomenon or person has control over me, even if I don't think that person created me, but if that person has control over me or my destiny, that's an idol. That I'm saying something else other than God has power over me. And the reality is that the only person who has power over me and control over me is God. So if I think my boss or my bank manager or my doctor or medical science really has control over me, that's an idol. What I have to realize is that just like the sun is a tool through which God gives life to the earth, everything physical is just the tools through which, the vessels, the garments through which the divine flow from Hashem comes to me. So when the doctor cures me, it's not the doctor, it's coming from God. The doctor is just the conduit. But if you're going to serve the conduit and you think that conduit actually has power over you, that's idol worship. So if I walk down the street and I'm worried about anything in the nature or what other people can do to me, that's in a sense, that's a form of idol worship, because I'm serving the physical and not really realizing that what's beneath all of reality is the presence of Hashem, and the presence of Hashem, and Hashem himself is the only one that can control my fate and my destiny, other than my own free choice. But putting that aside for a moment, what does this have to do with the mask? The mask is, when you look at the mask, you see only the external, and you don't see the internal. You don't see what's hiding behind the mask, right? The purpose of the mask is to conceal, or the purpose of the mask is to tell you, is only a mask here, look deeper, right? On Purim, when someone puts on a mask, you don't think that the mask is the costume, right? You put on a costume because it's a joke, and then you have a costume, and then you have to guess who's behind the costume. The problem is when you put on a costume and that person, and you think that person, that it's not a costume. You think that the masecha, the mask, is the actual person. That's idol worship. And in other words, in our life, if we believe that any physical thing, any physical thing has power over us, or any person or any phenomenon has true power over us, then we're not realizing that thing is just a mask. And what really has power over us is Hashem himself. So are we serving the mask, or are we serving what's behind the mask? And what's behind the mask is always Hashem. And that's our attitude toward nature. And that's how we correct the sin of the golden calf in our life. When we realize, when we look around the world, and we look at nature, and we look at everything in our life, and we see that what we see is the external layer. But beneath that external layer is the soul of everything. And the soul of everything is the presence of God. And now the question is, do we choose to see the mask and not see what's beneath the mask? Or do we choose to see the mask and say, the mask is just an invitation to unmask, to peer behind the concealments and discover the true truth and the true power in charge of us and our destiny, and that is God. And if we do that, then we don't have to worry, and we don't have to have anxiety about the future, because no one can really harm me, because I'm in the care and presence of the Almighty God himself. So that is the story in short. There's so much more to say on this parsha, but it's 11:01. We'll stop here. Anybody has comments, questions, jokes, contradictions, whatever you want to raise, please raise it. Everybody have a wonderful day.